Hi, Sebastian. Can you please introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Sebastian. I work for Witalec, and basically I'm a developer advocate.
Okay.
And I specialize in working with NativeScript, which is pretty much one of my favorite technologies at the moment. I play a lot of football, the real football.
Soccer?
Wow, it's not soccer. We actually get to kick the ball, right? Yeah, I play a lot of football, and so it's basically my life is divided between technology, football, and possibly photography as well.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's pretty much me.
How did you get into NativeScript?
So it was actually quite funny because I was like a few years ago, one of the first developers that was working on the NativeScript project, he came over to the London office and he showed me this thing, and he was like, well, this is our answer to hybrid development, right? Because basically at that point Cordova was like the #1 option for mobile development across different platforms, but there were some limitations. So he gave me, he showed me the whole idea of how you could have JavaScript code but building mobile applications with native UI, and I was like, oh my god, this is such a great idea. And then even at that point, this was very, very early stages. We didn't have any UI abstraction layer and everything. Creating a button required 10 lines of code. But the thing was that you could create a button, like a native iOS button with JavaScript, which was mind-blowing, right? And then this kind of really got me into the whole thing, and I was really waiting until these guys had something that we could share with the community and everything, and this pretty much was the beginning of the story for me.
And at what point did NativeScript start to formulate? When did it become kind of ready, for people to start using it outside of the development that this person was working on?
So it's actually officially, it was May 2015 when we released NativeScript version 1.0, but really we open sourced it in about February, March 2015, because at that point we already had something that was workable, so you could start working with it. So we didn't have Angular integration just yet, but it was showing this is how you use JavaScript with XML and CSS to build mobile application. And then from May, when we released version 1.0, we were basically very confident that you could build those applications for production. Actually.
So you reached 1.0, and then since then, what kind of development have you seen? What kind of developments happened in the NativeScript?
So some of the things that we had to work on was improve the performance. So at the point of 1.0, it was working you could interact with it. It was a native UI, but there were some shortcomings, the applications were taking slightly longer to load than we would want them to do, and there was as well a limited set of components that you could use as an abstraction layer. So we had to kind of work out how to improve the performance general and then add additional features, right? Because if you want to build a mobile application and we give you a camera module, that's not enough, right? You need a lot more things. And in terms of that, we moved a lot. And as well, some of the great things we've seen, it was involving the community. So people who got on board with NativeScript, they really helped us with the second part, where extending the functionalities. They created so many cool plugins, which really, really helped our job.
So is there what's the plugin story like? How do you, is there a site where you can see a list of plugins? How do people find them? How does that work with NativeScript?
So basically what you can do is one of the way of finding plugins, you could go to npm.js and just search for NativeScript. That's one of the way. But as well, we just launched, we have a site which actually has all the NativeScript plugins. So if you just, let's say, search NativeScript plugins, there's a site that lists all of them. And we make sure that those plugins, have the right documentation, and then they are tested enough so that they're worth for our customers to have a look at them.
Right. And is the general workflow for people to build the application and then use the existing components? Do you find people creating components from scratch when they're actually working with in the process of building a NativeScript app? Do you see people creating components from scratch?
So it really depends on the type of people we work with.
Okay.
So there's certain people that require specific functionality, and let's say if this functionality doesn't exist, but they have enough of, let's say, native knowledge of how those pieces of technology should work, they're able to actually create like a template, and based on that template, they could basically create a plugin that works both on iOS and Android, but following pretty much the same structure. So one of the big challenges that normally you have when you're building for iOS and Android is, let's say you have a calendar, and on Android maybe it's, in order to open a calendar it will be open calendar, but maybe on iOS somebody calls it pop-up calendar. And some of the things that we're trying to help with the plugin is like give an abstraction layer that, let's say we call it just open, but underneath you call either one function or the other, so that the people who use the calendar component later, they don't have to think of what is the exact syntax, what is the exact function call. So what we've seen as well, like from the community, people who have some of that knowledge and they have the need to push NativeScript further, they actually create their own components from scratch. But what is really good is like very often they are willing to give back to the community. So they don't just keep it for themselves, they actually usually publish it on npm so that everybody can use it.
And so would that kind of a plugin, would that include the JavaScript code and then the code for each of the platforms? Like there'd be like a class for Android and a class for iOS, or what would that generally look like?
In a way, yes. So the really cool thing is, let's take one example, like plugin I created. There's a plugin called NativeScript joystick. Okay. So I was building a mobile application to control my robot, and I needed a joystick to kind of like control it all around. But there wasn't a stock joystick available on Android iOS. So what I had to do in order to make it happen, I went to Android Arsenal and I found an Android native joystick component, and I imported it into my project. And then basically it's like a few functions that you have to implement, like on create, on destroy, and like on add the component, and then you expose like some of the properties, like what happens when you move the joystick from left to right. And so what I did is like I created a wrapper, completely all of it in TypeScript, right? So not a single line of Java for Android, it was just all TypeScript. Okay. And then when that was working, I went to CocoaPods and I found an equivalent for the joystick. Okay. And again, imported that CocoaPod and I created a TypeScript wrapper that followed exactly the same naming convention. And that was all. I didn't have to write a single line of Xcode or Swift or Java. All that code to talk directly to the native components was done from JavaScript.
That's very cool.
TypeScript. Which is amazing,
yeah,
right?
It is amazing, yeah.
Which and the funny thing was, like, I've never done any iOS development.
Wow.
And it took me like 6 hours to do the joystick from iOS with learning, Xcode syntax and all that. So I was like, wow, you could do that? It's
incredible,
like,
yeah.
Incredible, yeah.
And so the reason why you guys are here is because you have a really good integration with Angular, right? And so when did that start happening? When did that integration come about?
So actually, what happened in like May 2015, we released NativeScript 1.0, and at a similar time, the Angular team, they started thinking of saying like, hey, AngularJS is great, it works really well for web, but the world doesn't end at web, right? So they came up with the idea of creating platform-agnostic version of Angular, which now we call like the version 4, etc. Yeah. And they reached out to us and they said like, I think what you did was pretty cool. Like, how about we work together? So we pretty much like set up a couple of meetings. And then I think we had like hangout every Wednesday after we kind of agreed that it is a good idea to work together. So we got a lot of help like from Tobias Bosch, who was working with one of our lead developers, and basically Tobias explained the architecture of Angular, and we knew exactly what was it that we had to do. And we kind of thought that like, okay, we're gonna work together and we're gonna provide you feedback so that you can make changes so that it works for us in order to make it work. But the architecture was so good, like we didn't really have to push any changes from our side. We just created our NativeScript renderer and it was just working. It's quite amazing.
Do you think something like that might be possible for another framework? Maybe like, so Ember recently released, the Ember community released Glimmer.js, which is just the rendering engine, so it's been really like reduced down to the bare minimum. It doesn't have any of the kind of routing functionality that Ember has, but the intention is that eventually those things will become available as optional things. Like, do you think it's it might be possible to do something like that with Glimmer as well?
Well, technically, yes. I mean, so for as long you don't have dependence on the browser and DOM, technically there shouldn't be a problem at all.
Yeah.
So if there is a clear path on how to kind of take the Ember syntax that triggers something, and we could make that trigger something in NativeScript, it should be technically possible.
It sounds possible, and it sounds like NativeScript in this case could be a perfect solution to work with Glimmer if that's possible, because it would be very enabling for the Ember community to be able to say you can build applications for you can build your application in Ember and then or in Glimmer.js, and now you can also just do the same thing with NativeScript as what Angular is doing with NativeScript. I think that would be huge.
Yeah. So I think the one challenge I see with that is somebody has to get that done, right? So what we really do right now is we support two versions of NativeScript. One that is NativeScript Core, which allows you to build applications with JavaScript, and the second one is Angular. And those two take a lot of effort on our side. So if we were to add Ember, like the biggest pushback would be like getting the right developers to get that done. But if there's somebody strong from the community that would be willing to work with us, like, it would be possible. Why not? It would be amazing.
Well, hopefully there'll be Ember people listening, and hopefully maybe something will come of this. One of the things that I know that's happening right now is there's some conversation about how you can share code between Angular and NativeScript, right? Because some applications, if a company is working on a web application using Angular, and then they would like to maybe start a parallel project using to build native apps using NativeScript, and there is some consideration now about like what using sharing the code from NativeScript, or having kind of a shared library that could be used for both the Angular app for the browser and Angular app for NativeScript, right? Can you talk a little bit about like what's happening in that, or what that might look like?
Maybe I can take it one step back first.
Okay.
So first, let's look at the challenge of sharing from the technical point of view, right? So if you're using Angular, and you could, let's say, create an Angular service that can take care of credit card payments, this service is exactly what you would use on a mobile application and in web. Right. So from that perspective, there's zero effort for developers. Right. Or let's say you create a component, and the component has like all the bindings and all that, all the logic that drives your application is exactly the same component for both mobile and web. The difference between web and mobile is in the presentation layer. So while if you display something on a web application, you pretty much going for the UX where you have, let's say, tooltips, or you have much bigger screen, and let's say you don't necessarily have to deal with swipes and touches and these kind of things. While in mobile, you have different kind of interactions. So from the technical point of view, like sharing services, components, pipes, it's like Angular takes care of it for us out of the box, which is great. But the challenge is like, how do you structure your project, right? One of the easiest options is if you're doing like a project that has 3 components, it's something that you can do over in a couple of weeks. You could literally create all your components, all your services, build a web application, and separately you could create a mobile application, NativeScript, and just copy over those component services, and you could very quickly do that. That only works for small projects, because and copy and paste is just like for small stuff. But if you want to build a serious project where you don't want to have 2 separate things, you don't want to copy paste, you want to be able to test everything in one place, what we do is we created some projects we're using Webpack, and basically Webpack has some configuration that when you're building the application for web, you would take the HTML files that are specific to the web project, and when you're building for NativeScript, you actually go and feed the NativeScript HTML files. So what we did is we used like this naming convention. So if you, let's say, have, I don't know, the profile page, right? So you have profile.component.tns.html, that would be the NativeScript version. And then you would have profile.component.web.html, and you have the 2 separate files. And then basically Webpack will give you the right file as you go. But so with the HTML and then the CSS, the styling, that's different. So again, we need help from the Webpack to feed the right CSS files. But the cool thing is that if your credit card payment service works, like it just sits as one file in one place, and you just share it across everywhere.
So the code sharing part is already working. It's making the integration, actual build pipeline part work seamlessly together.
Yes.
Is where the challenge is.
Yeah, so we have few we call them like the Angular seed projects, where you can, if you're starting from scratch, then basically you could clone one of those projects and then start adding your parts to that, and that works quite well. But very often the scenario would be somebody already has a web application, and then they have to add a mobile app to it. So you can't just like, I don't know, clone something and copy paste. It's not so simple.
Right.
So this is a story we're trying to explore right now and trying to see what would be the best way to do it. And for me, the best solution for Angular developers is just using Angular CLI. Like long term, I see Angular CLI being the main driver helping you do that, right? You build your application, you spend 2 months, you publish it, then somebody comes back to you, say, hey, here's some more money. How about you give me my mobile application, right? And then you just run ng add NativeScript, and then this could give you the necessary parts. So this is like my go-to, like the perfect solution.
Sounds amazing, though. Yeah.
Well, it's not there yet. Not there
Well,
yet,
no, I mean, but you know, you have to first set the vision, and then you work towards it, right? So
that's my vision. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and the scenarios we'll be looking at is you start from scratch. That's one. 2 is you have web, you want to add mobile, or you have mobile, you want to add web. And these will be the 3 different scenarios that we will have to treat differently. But hopefully we'll find a great solution that works for everyone.
If someone wanted to reach out to you and you know, chat about this, what would be the best way to reach you on the internet?
So the best thing is really reach out to me on Twitter. I'm Seba Vita, which is, as by the way, is my first 4 letters of my first name and first 4 letters of my surname.
Okay.
And yeah, they can reach out to me, they can tweet to me or send something on DM, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. You know, like it's Angular community, right? We all work together, so that's the thing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me, and it's been a really nice conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey there. Are you into reactive programming using JavaScript? Do you have to deal with asynchrony in your web app? Then join this instructor Ben Lesh to learn all of the ins and outs of RxJS in his hands-on workshop. Available online and in person, go to rxworkshop.com for more details and to book your spot today. Hey there. Do you use Angular? Do you like fun in the sun? And how do you feel about boats? If you're nodding yes, then come join us on ng-cruise to learn more about Angular while on a fabulous Caribbean cruise. Check out ng-cruise.com for speaker lineup, workshop details, and to book your spot today.